3.5 years after their final withdrawal, is it back to Iraq for U.S. troops? The White House approving the deployment of 450 non-combat soldiers on top of the 3,000 now there to advise the Iraqi army. The move has bipartisan support in Washington. Less talked about, though, is who those forces will be advising. Not so much, it seems, beleaguered government forces, but these fighters, we can show you them later, these fighters for Sunni tribesmen who oppose the jihadists, is effectively bypassing Baghdad, the best way forward. It was Iran-backed Shia militias that recently led the retaking of Saddam Hussein's hometown of Ramadi, a tacit divvying up of burden sharing between rivals, perhaps, but some fear a de facto partition of Iraq. What does it all say about the country's future prospects as a nation state? Today in the France 24 debate, back to Iraq. And with us from Orlando, Florida, he teaches at National Defense University, Michael Pregent, former intelligence officer and embedded military advisor to the Iraqi army. Nice to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Former U.S. State Department official William Jordan is with us. Nice to see you. And Pierre Conessat, former advisor to the French Defense Ministry, who teaches at the prestigious political science institute Sciences Po. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. The battle for Anbar province is only just beginning after the fall of its capital, Ramadi, to ISIS. We can hear more now in this report by Kedavan Gorgistani.
Train, advise, and assist. That's what the 450 U.S. troops are being sent to Iraq for. The immediate goal is to help Iraqi troops retake the city of Ramadi, seized by the Islamic State group last month. Under the plan, the U.S. will open a 5th training site in Iraq, located at the Al-Taqadum Air Base in the Anbar province.
I think what it represents is a conclusion by the president and his national security team that the situation on the ground in Iraq would benefit from more trained Iraqi security forces and more Sunni tribal fighters that are operating under the command and control of the Iraqi central government.
According to the Obama administration, the U.S. is simply adapting to the needs of the Iraqi government, not changing its strategy. While Republicans called the move a step in the right direction, they still believe it isn't enough.
It's clear that our training mission alone has not been enough to slow down the spread of ISIL, and more needs to be happening on the ground, and we or our allies need to be playing a stronger role.
A stronger role that Republicans see in the form of combat troops on the ground. But while Barack Obama admitted earlier this week that his strategy in Iraq was incomplete, that's a line the U.S. president still refuses to cross.
William Jordan, the announcement of 450 extra advisors, what was your reaction when you heard it?
Well, my first reaction was that means that there's something close to a brigade of American troops that have been sent to Iraq since the first advisors arrived. My second reaction was, what are they all actually doing? And there's
because I heard that
about that.
What we're hearing is that 50 of them are the actual advisors. The other 400 are to provide security for those.
Well,
50.
and I think if you break it down, given what I know about how the American military operates, of this, now roughly 3,500 troops, of the vast majority of them are going to be providing what's called force protection. I mean, they're there to protect the embassy, they're there to protect these installations, they're there to protect the trainers, they're there to protect the advisors who deploy out in the field in whatever fashion. Then you'll have a large number of people who'll be involved simply in logistics. I mean, the United States has also indicated, in addition to sending these troops, it's going to ramp up military weapons and equipment deliveries to the Iraqis. So, all of that requires Americans to do that. Then there's going to be a significant number of people devoted to continuing to ramp up operational coordination and what are called these fusion cells to provide the intelligence and other advice to the Iraqi maneuver units and others, to give them information on where we think the enemy forces are located and where it would be a good idea to attack. And then after that, you have whatever X number of advisors who are actually, being deployed to provide the frontline training and other assistance to Iraqis, either currently serving soldiers or these people that we want to bring in rapidly as recruits.
And I guess how many U.S. troops are needed in Iraq is the follow-up question.
Well, that's a big question. I have no idea. I mean, again, it depends on where you're going to deploy them and in what capacity you're going to actually use them. I mean, if I recall correctly, when we were talking about negotiating some kind of a status of forces agreement that would allow U.S. troops to stay in Iraq, this goes back to 2008, 2009, all the way up to 2011, the U.S. residual force was supposed to be something around on the order of about 10,000. With a certain number of those being maneuver and force protection units, and the others being, trainers and that kind of thing. So I don't know. I have no idea. It depends on, how we're going to actually ramp up now this supposedly enhanced training mission.
Michael Pregent, your thoughts? 450 extra advisors. What does it mean?
Well, what it means is this is the first effort for us to train Sunnis, and we're a year late. We should have been doing this in the summer. It was a recommended strategy in the summer to send back a cadre of Americans that have worked with the Sons of Iraq and the Sunni Awakening in the past, have good relationship with the tribal leaders, are trusted, and to stand up a force to fight ISIS. Because as you see, the Kurds are willing to fight for areas they're from. The Shia militias are willing to fight for areas they're from. The Sunnis have not been allowed to build a force, and that's the biggest problem here. This training effort, especially based on the percentage that we'll be doing the training versus the force protection, we are outsourcing the training. It's a concept that the U.S. military uses called train the trainer. So what the U.S. is going to do, they're going to train the Iraqi military to train the Sunni tribes. And what that really means is you're training a predominantly Shia force who doesn't trust the Sunnis to begin with, to train tribal members that are vetted by Baghdad. And what I mean by vetted by Baghdad, it makes sense for them to vet people, but they're looking for affiliations, such as relationships with a former Ba'athist, any anti-government stance in the past, any affiliation with any group that they think is dangerous will basically kick you off this list to be trained. And we saw that with the Sons of Iraq, and we saw that with the Sunni Awakening. And that's the problem we're getting into here, is this strategy will not generate the Sunni force we need to fight ISIS. In fact, it'll be intentionally delayed by this vetting process that Baghdad will insist on.
You mentioned the Awakening. Let's just explain for our viewers. When it comes to Anbar province, this does indeed look like a sequel, the U.S. having devoted manpower and money to that Sunni area of Iraq in 2006 and 2007, effectively bankrolling the so-called Sahwa or Awakening militias who turned against what was then al-Qaeda, and those militias marginalized by Baghdad when the Americans left. What's happened, Michael, to those Awakening militias, and are they being enrolled?
Well, this is how it worked in the past. We would identify a leader, we'd give that leader a radio. Within 10 minutes, a U.S. company would arrive to provide combat power to negate the threat, or they could call in close air support. We were embedded with them. They weren't simply left out there on their own. They were able to call Americans. Well, the Maliki government viewed them as a threat, targeted key leaders, dismantled the program, and left them open to reprisal attacks by al-Qaeda, Shia militias, ISIS, and now Shia militias again. So there's a huge trust deficit in the Sunni community for a U.S. program to arm the tribes when they've been armed in the past, and to have Baghdad work in this process. They don't trust us necessarily, and they're having a hard time trusting Baghdad, because what needs to happen is there shouldn't be a temporary arming of the Sunnis. This should be a, let's bring 30,000 pre-vetted Sunnis that have already been vetted, Sunnis that are already in the Iraqi security forces, back into the divisions that fell, and make them permanent members of the Iraqi security forces to protect, in a National Guard construct, their areas that they come from. That will work. Temporary arming of Sunnis is not going to work.
And so why isn't that option being employed?
Well, because it requires embedding Americans with the Sunni tribes. It involves special operations, it involves intelligence, and it involves an American maneuver company or a battalion to move into the area to provide force protection to the Sunni force that's in contact. This current construct to train Sunni tribes will subjugate them to predominantly Shia Iraqi security forces, and by extension to Shia PMUs, where this scenario is the one we need to avoid. Let's send the Sunni battalion forward to clear the ISIS obstacle belt, and when they come back, let's shoot them as deserters. That sounds extreme, but you have to understand the dynamic at play here. When you have Americans training Shia militia and Shia Iraqi security forces to train the very Sunnis they don't trust, you're going to end up with a dynamic that is not necessarily going to work absent American embedded advisors.
I was going to say, so listening to you, Michael, it sounds like we should have a lot more U.S. troops in Iraq.
Yeah, we need 10,000 U.S. troops in Iraq, at least. We need a combat aircraft capability. We need intelligence. We need special operators. We need force protection guys. You know, we have airborne divisions. We have special forces divisions. We have Marines. You know, Americans don't have an appetite to go back to war when they see a mom saying goodbye to their kids at an airport. But they're fully comfortable with special operators, airborne units, and Marines going to fight a terrorist organization. I think there will be an appetite once leadership in D.C. actually gets this right, because we're 6 months behind ISIS. We have to build something to stand in the way of ISIS moving into Western Baghdad. And at this tempo, this late in the game, you know, there's only 3,000 to 5,000 Shia militiamen standing between ISIS and Western Baghdad, and 450 new U.S. advisors with only 50 of them being trainers is not sufficient to make this happen in the required time.
Pierre Conessa, do you agree? Do we need 10,000 U.S. troops to defend Baghdad and retake the country from ISIS?
No, I think we are just examining the technically the problem. I mean, but what the meaning of 10,000 more American troops there? I mean, no political meaning. If we support, you know.
But you heard Michael explain that politically you can sell it to the American public.
Yes, but you know, as my experience at the Ministry of Defense drove me to the same experience. You know, when you put a finger in a crisis in which you put advisor. Usually, if the troop you are sustaining are losing the battle, usually your advisors are going more in the front, you know, to explain why they have been defeated. Then they ask
what
the
they
capital.
Call mission creep.
Yeah, and then they ask the capital, we are not enough. We understand how we have to do, but we need more troops. That's the step we are living now. Then, after that, you know, as a military man don't like lose a battle, they ask more. And this is a process in which, you know, to put more troops and more troops and more troops, but you lose the political goal you are aiming. Just remember that today, there is a war between Sunnis and Shias. What could do American troops in that battle? I mean, nothing. You are not the white knight, you know, going there to say, oh, those people, we are going to make a peace process. That's a completely
let me just add to that and amplify some of this. I mean, I think that, you know, whether the war or this increased involvement can be sold to the American people, which I think is true up to a certain point. And that point is the degree to which you know, Americans, certainly of my generation, remember what happened in South Vietnam when that
started as a few advisors.
As a few advisors, but also towards the end, remember, I mean, we had armed and trained the South Vietnamese army to be able to stand on its own and gradually pulled the United States out, and then it all fell like a house of cards. I mean, because ultimately the political steps were never taken. The regime was never able to sort of solidify itself in a legitimate way to be able to counter, you know, what was opposing it. And I think that for us, for the United States, yes, you could have a full contingent of 10,000 troops, and you could have all of the special operators and all the rest of it, and maybe you could actually come up with a strategy, which is lacking right now, of how it is you actually want to carry out this fight. But the problem is, in the end, these American troops are going to be in a foreign country that really does not want us there. I mean, we may be able to reattach ourselves to some of the Sunnis who still remember the awakening and all. But first of all, remember how many years it took the United States to come up with that concept and to successfully, with the surge and the embedding of American troops in the area, how long it took the Americans to finally be able to turn the tide. Then you have to add to that the Sunni Shiite dimension in Iraq, which is still a gaping, horrible sore, and behind all of that, Iran, with which the United States does not have an easy way to work, on the battlefield in terms of what's actually happening. And Abadi has got a real problem on his
Iraqi
Shiite
prime
flank,
minister, yeah.
right? In terms of being able to sell this concept of an enhanced, new reawakening, and even if it's the Americans who are running it, because again, we can only be, we can't be a little bit pregnant, and we will find ourselves facing this mission creep issue.
All right, so what do you answer to our viewer here who says Baghdad can't end like the fall of Saigon in the 70s?
Well, I don't think it will, but I think that it could end up being a bit more like Syria, or a bit more like Somalia, or a bit more like Lebanon. I mean, I don't think it's going to end up being that way. But when people talk about the dangers of partition, the dangers of fragmentation, I mean that's for real. But I don't think we're there yet. However, I don't know at what point the United States gets real about this. The biggest, in terms of what Michael was saying earlier, the thing that also occurred to me in terms of sort of the United States getting more fully into the game of training these Sunnis once more, it reminded me of how long it's taken us to get to training rebels in Syria. We're still vetting. We're still going through all of this stuff. We're only slowly beginning to deploy people, and with what mission? Probably not even the right mission. We're 6 months late getting into the game fighting against the Islamic State, in the same way that we're 2 years late fighting against what we should have been fighting in Syria in the first place.
All right, Michael, President, lots of questions. First of all, your reaction to the panelists' warning against mission creep.
Well, when we talk about Vietnam, we got to use the analogy a little bit differently. We already had established success with this Iraqi force with these Sunni tribes, and it was dismantled by Maliki. The Sons of Iraq initiative and the awakening had immediate consequences, immediate effects. Casualty rates went down drastically within weeks of establishing the security initiative. The problem is we didn't make it a permanent force. And in regards to Iraq wanting U.S. back, the Kurds have been begging for us to come back, and the Sunnis have been begging for us to come back since ISIS went in. Yes, you're exactly right. Iran doesn't want us back, and the Shia politicians don't want us back. But we have to reestablish leverage if we're going to take this seriously, or we need to pull our guys out if we're just going to do this thing halfway, because you're putting Americans between Fallujah and Ramadi. You're broadcasting it to the world where this base is. You're telling them who we're going to train. If you think for a second, ISIS isn't monitoring the people that are going into this base and leaving this base and where they live. I mean, the threats happen. Remember, the Iraqi army took their uniforms off every time they left a base because they didn't want Al-Qaeda to know that they were part of the security forces, because they were afraid of being killed, because Al-Qaeda knew where they lived. We've got to do this right. Anyway, go back to the panel. Thanks for...
All right, we're gonna pick up on that point when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.